Please welcome back Vin Cipolla.
Thank you, Andy, David, Jared, and Tucker. The health of New York's small and entrepreneurial economy is, to me, one of the surest indicators of whether we're building a more livable and resilient city. We are fortunate to have minds like yours engaged in this issue. Thank you again, guys. Now we'll turn from startups struggling to take root to a sector with a long history in our city. Cultural institutions are some of the most vital community assets we have. From BAM to the Studio Museum to El Museo, the speakers on our next panel lead institutions that serve as cultural anchors for their neighborhoods as well as cultural magnets for the city as a whole. How can our storied cultural institutions continue to serve these two essential goals? What are the pressures, the opportunities, the dreams, and the challenges of knitting these vibrant spaces into the fabric of our city? Please welcome our moderator for this next session back to the summit stage, the New York Times renowned arts reporter, Robin Pogrebin.
Welcome to my panelists, and thank you all for being here. We don't have a lot of time today, and these are some really great people sitting next to me. And I wanted to actually call out Katy Clark, who joined us last minute because she's not in your program from BAM. And so I wanted to just start with this idea of each of you run an institution that is not only a mainstream institution that is known citywide, but it has national stature, but you're also very specifically integral to the neighborhoods you're in. So if you could each address how you balance those different things in terms of who you're thinking about when you do your programming, what you feel your obligation is in terms of to your immediate surroundings, as well as the larger city or the nation.
Well, BAM, I think, has had a very, very long history of navigating exactly this kind of axis, which is, the local, the intensely local thing of being from and of Brooklyn, and also being a global institution. And it's always been very committed to the import and export of international work. So I don't think that's not a new thing for BAM. I think the really radically new thing for BAM, apart from me being the first kind of new leader in, I think, 48 years of the history of the institution, is what's going on right now in the neighborhood. And even between when I was hired for BAM and then I went away for a couple of months and came back, new buildings had been built, new floors were going up, the light, everything in that neighborhood had changed, and it was a very visceral feeling to me. And so I think one of the big conversations going forward for BAM is, it's the Mr. Rogers thing. It's who are the people in our neighborhood? Mm-hmm. And that's a really fun and challenging and interesting question for me. We have, I think, 15,000 people moving into the neighborhood in the next 5 years, and right on our doorstep. Not even within 3 miles, but right in the middle of the cultural district. And that's just a really interesting place to be.
Yeah. I think that, Robin, to your question about how to balance the sort of international and the local, it's really about a synergistic approach to both of them being equally important. When the Studio Museum in Harlem was founded in 1968, it was founded really with the idea of its relationship to Harlem, the Harlem of that present, but also the Harlem of the past, being critically important to our mission and who we are. But now when we think about the local, we are also thinking about what it means to be an institution in a changing community and how an institution can play a role in that change. What can we be that helps sort of the dynamism, but also lives within the complexity of change? And so the local is really understood through our role as being a good neighbor, a good civic partner to the neighborhood at large.
When you were thinking of, when you're renovating, which you're about to do, I mean, you had thought for a moment about changing the name and then realized in Harlem was an important part of the name. Isn't that right?
Completely, completely. I mean, we have a fantastic logo that was created for us by Eddie Opara that sort of takes out the and the in, and that's because often people get our name not quite right, and they think of us as the Studio Museum of Harlem versus the Studio Museum in Harlem, and I call this, you know, the prepositional problematic, because that in and that of really get to what you were talking about. Right? And we try and sort of balance through what it means to have the understanding of being in and of critical to our mission and critical to what we do every day.
We have a preposition issue too. We are El Museo del Barrio, which really means the museum of the neighborhood. And we have a special relationship, I think, to this question about, you know, the balance between the local and the national. El Museo is the first Latin American museum of art in the United States. And it began as, you know, this community neighborhood institution. But the reality is, you know, 50 years later, today, is that Latin Americans are becoming, you know, by 1940, probably the majority minority in the United States. That puts a different kind of emphasis on, you know, this transition from where we began to what we need to be as the first Latin American museum in the country. And for me, what it means is really addressing what I think is the democratic imperative of museums generally, which is to represent people. The Studio Museum and El Museo both began from this imperative that African Americans and Latin Americans were not being represented in the city in New York in the 1960s, in the museums, in the schools, in the cultural institutions. And so our institutions were founded for those reasons. I think it's an interesting, you know, term of transition for us as we become more even, not just national, but international.
Is there ever a point, given that Latin American art has sort of now penetrated many institutions, do you ever kind of, you're so successful you put yourself out of business?
Yes, that's a good question. You know, the Whitney just had this grand opening of its new building and showcasing its collection. We noted that we counted at least 5 Latin American artists on, you know, whose work was on display in this inaugural exhibition. Each one of those 5 artists had had a solo exhibition at El Museo del Barrio. I think that, you know, proves the point that the museum can have an impact on, you know, enhancing an artist's career to the national level.
We recently did a special issue of the Arts and Leisure section about all of the capital projects going on simultaneously in New York right now. It amounts to more than $3 billion that has to be raised. Thelma's project is one of them in Studio Museum. And you both have, you know, been involved with capital projects. BAM has one underway, and you are contemplating one, it sounds like, Daniel. But so to what extent do you have to kind of, what are those ambitions about, would you say? I mean, sometimes people say, oh, BAM is taking over the world. They're, you know, taking over
Why not?
downtown Brooklyn. And I'm sure there are people who might be concerned about, you know, you losing a little bit more of your local quality by doing a big, ambitious building. So, you know, kind of what is the point of these things and getting bigger? And they're also, you know, financially hard to sustain. So why take the risk?
The projects that BAM is involved in right now are kind of rather interesting ones, and I'll just talk about one of them, which is the one that's a public project, which is the Fulton Street project. You know, I like to think about, you know, large organizations like ours, you know, we're very accountable to a whole kind of ecosystem of arts organizations within the cultural district, and there are now 60 organizations within the cultural district. But this question about how you remain sort of attractive to audiences, you know, I'm slightly different in the sense that I'm running theaters in Brooklyn, and theaters are not easy buildings to encounter if you're not a theater person. And you can walk into the lobby of a building that is unfamiliar to you, and that can be really an intimidating experience. And I think, you know, one of the things that's been driving issues around cultural space in the cultural district in Brooklyn is, you know, how can we make this feel like an experience that people can actually access without having to go, you know, to the whole feeling of walking into a lobby and going into a theater and having something that's less familiar. And so the Fulton Street project for me is really all about audiences. And again, the people in our neighborhood, and not allowing all of that space to become retail space, not allowing all of that space to be taken up by other uses. And it doesn't mean, it'll still be BAM branded space for sure, but it's a way of people being able to experience a little bit about what the performing arts is in a community without having to take, the big
Buy a ticket.
yeah.
Describe what it's going to be.
Step. So Fulton Street is basically, partly an enhancement of the lobby of the Harvey, which has remained unchanged for a very long time. We're actually going into the museum business with these lovely people. We're actually operating a little gallery next door. But then there's a condo on the corner of 230 Ashland, which BAM actually owns. And we're sort of calling it the sort of BAM Visitor Center. But it's the idea of commanding a streetscape corner, again, where people can come in and relax and sit down, and a bit like the brick stoop. And I think the more places you have like that, where people get comfortable around the art, and get comfortable around the performing arts, and that's very hard in the performing arts. So I don't know quite how it's going to look and feel when it's done, but that's the aspiration.
Thelma, what's your rationale?
Yeah, well, my hope is with our expansion that we are not simply getting bigger, but we're getting better. We have lived beautifully in a 1914 building that was created in an amazing adaptive reuse by the architect Max Bond, but we have outgrown our ability to function and actually present well in the space itself. So the design that we are now working with, beautifully designed for us by David Adjaye, really creates, a building that fully encompasses our program, really puts audience at the center, creates what has been our long commitment to art and artists, our studio program, our collection, our exhibition programs, as well as our education programs, into spaces that are made for them. It also creates an amazing public space on 125th Street that along this cultural corridor that we are thrilled to share with the Apollo Theater, the National Black Theater, the Caribbean Cultural Center, but that on this, the main street of Harlem, that there will be a space that really is about art and culture, that resonates with our past and our history, but also is infused by the life of art and artwork as we present it in the museum galleries.
I think it's important for people to know that there's real necessity behind it, that, you have to close in order to change shows.
We do. We have to bring art in and out, sort of off the street, as we do not have a loading dock or access to the building in many ways. But, we have worked in those confines for many years, and I think we've proven through our program that institutionally what we do is valid and important and significant, and the building that we are creating and that we've envisioned really actually meets what we know are the demands of our program and allows us to continue to excel.
I agree entirely, Thelma. But I'd have to say that I don't believe there's a dichotomy to want to serve one's community and want to grow and expand within the community. I don't think it's schizophrenic at all. I think one really abets the other. Is that, for example, we were founded by the Puerto Rican community in East Harlem, in El Barrio. And the way to serve the community is not just by solely focusing on the programs and projects of the community, but really putting in a bigger context. And to do that, you increasingly need, of course, more space. And as the mission of the museum changed, evolved into one of serving Latin American communities in the United States generally, not just one community. Therefore, the programming, expands, and how to properly adequately serve the growing needs, one has to think about space and how to
Can you give us any sense of what you're thinking about in terms of space? Can you give us a sense of what you are thinking about in terms of space?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to reveal this for the first time. Okay. One thing, we have this amazing theater, El Teatro, in our building, 600-seat, proscenium stage, orchestra pit. It's the best theater, I believe, a lot of people believe, in the Upper East Side. One idea is really to become more of a performing arts venue. And so I have this, and I love the BAM, so I've been thinking about this. And I've been thinking about EBAM in East Harlem, which would be El Barrio Academy of Music. How to increase the performing arts programming in East Harlem. And, looking at the model of the BAM, which I love so much. But really, we need to be able to showcase our growing collection as well as be able to produce exhibitions that are more national and international scale, which is, in today's day and age, the way that art is situated globally. And we need to be able to do that. And to think about a community sort of concept restriction is no longer really the way to serve our communities.
Can I just add something to something that Robin said earlier about, why is space needed for the arts? And, I often liken this to the argument of, the arts education argument, which is, are you doing the same thing that somebody else is in the arts education? Well, maybe, but do we really think there's enough arts education in New York City? I mean, that kind of speaks for itself. And the same thing is true for me about space. It doesn't matter where you go in the arts ecosystem in New York. It doesn't matter whether you're talking to an individual artist or a large organization. Everybody talks about space and not having enough space. So the idea that we won't all still agitate for more space in whatever way we can, either by supporting smaller organizations to have space or by building something like the Fisher Building at BAM, which is at least a third, community not-for-profit rentals, because for people that really, really need affordable rental space. The building I was involved with in my old position at St. Luke's was also a building like that. I just don't think you can really have too much space for the arts in a city like New York. And compared to the other uses of space here, I think we're gonna carry on shouting loudly for that.
And I think there's an argument also to be made about the fact that all of our organizations are deeply invested in presentation, right? We collect works of art, we present them, we commission works of art and present them, but we're also about serving audiences. And when we start talking about the physical structures of our institutions, it's about our audiences. And I think all of our organizations have also been about this creation of audiences. I know when Studio Museum was founded in the late 60s in Central Harlem, El Museo, and East Harlem, it was also about creating the opportunity for audiences who did not have opportunity around cultural engagement, and creating institutions in the neighborhood that allowed for a deep opportunity to meet artists, see works of art, engage in arts education, and engage with each other. And I think as we grow our spaces, it's about continuing to serve that mission as well.
Okay, thank you all. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Welcome.
Appreciate it.